Welcome to Shop Talk, presented by Show Chic, where they always put the rider in first place.
They'd asked if we'd talk a little bit about what's happening at FEI and around the world, I think more the international scene. So I thought that's what I would touch on. Obviously, I'm willing to try to answer any questions you might have. But I thought I would go through a little bit with what's happening, first competition-wise, and a little bit with the FEI and some other things within the FEI. So first, I just wanted to touch on the World Cup, which that's coming up first, right, in Omaha. So hopefully all of you will be there. It's hard to know at this point what athletes will be there. I think the North American League is a little easier to predict, but not 100% at this point. We still have one more World Cup qualifier with the Palm Beach Derby. So there could be some change depending on who competes and who doesn't compete. And I think at this last World Cup qualifier last weekend, kind of Ashley Holzer had a very nice ride, and it was exciting to see, and especially on Valentine, a horse I like a lot, properly named for today. But anyway, since she had only done, that was her first World Cup qualifier, she took, of course, the 20 points for the North American League. And so that meant that Sarah, who's been trying to make it for the World Cup, ends up with 17 points. So that made it a little bit tougher for Sarah at this point. But as I said, that's still to be seen. The Western European League has 3 more qualifiers, actually, World Cup qualifiers. So that is going to be quite interesting to see what happens there. And I think one of the things that's interesting it's for all the leagues, but it's particularly interesting for the Western European League, is that, of course, the country is only allowed a maximum of 3 competitors. And that includes the title defender. So Jessica is the title defender from last year. So she has met the requirements that they have to have in order to be coming back. So she should be in Omaha. But that makes 1 German, so that leaves only space for 2 more Germans. So and they are really in contention. And I think one of the things that's interesting here in Florida is, of course, we have Frederick trying. He's on the list, but it's going to be very, very difficult, I think, for him. Isabel is actually ranked number 1. Jessica's brother, I think, is right now, Ben is ranked number 2. And so, and Helen is ahead of him, I think. So there are several Germans that are ahead. So that's going to be quite interesting. And so we have Neumünster, which is just coming up this month, and Gothenburg, and then 's-Hertogenbosch. So I think that could change things a lot and there were only total of 9 candidate athletes from the Western European League. So just so everyone knows, there are 18 people invited, or 18 athletes invited. North American League has 3. What is interesting and a little bit sad to me is that there are no Canadians really high up in the standings this year. This is the 3rd year we've used a point system instead of a percentage system, which means that there's a little bit more strategy involved in choosing what shows they go to and how to earn their points. Central European League has 2 representatives, Pacific League 1, then we have a non-league national federations get a spot, and then I mentioned the title defender, and then the extra starting place, which is up to the FEI to choose who they want to put, or working probably with the organizer. But it cannot, in our case, it cannot be a U.S. rider because we have 3 already that should be making it. This 2023 is really a preparation year for the Olympics for Paris, so 2024. I think just a little background on how Paris will go. It's the same format as was in Tokyo, which means it's a 3-member team. You can have a country can have one traveling reserve, and the way it's set up is actually the reserve can be put in about 2 hours before the start. They all go through the jog, the horse inspection, and it can be put in up to 2 hours, I believe, before the start of the Grand Prix class. So with a 3-member team, there is no drop score. So the Grand Prix is the qualifier for the teams to make it. And in Tokyo, I have to remember exactly, I think in Paris, 10 teams will move forward to the Grand Prix Special, which is the actual qualifying, which is the actual team competition. And then the Grand Prix also determines who goes into the freestyle. So the Grand Prix Special is only a team competition, and the Grand Prix is the qualifier for both. So if there are individuals competing for their countries, they go in the Grand Prix and may go into the freestyle, but they don't get to do the special. We were very lucky in Herning in that we ended up in 6th place. The top 6 countries from the World Championships are invited. And then the Europeans have a chance with their European Championships to have 2 more in there. So just a reminder, in Herning, it was gold medal team was Denmark, silver was Great Britain, Germany was bronze, Sweden was 4th, and the Netherlands 5th, and then the United States. So there are several European countries that are still going to be trying to make it to Paris. France, as a host country, automatically has a spot there. But as I said, two European countries can qualify through the European Championships, and then 2 North and South American countries can qualify through the Pan Am Games. So the Pan Am Games are in Santiago in October of this year. And that is, we of course will be there with a team. But since we're qualified, if we happen to win, it would not take a slot away from any of the other 2. So those that are qualified don't take slots away, obviously, from them. So I think in the Pan Am Games, it is again in 2023 a mixed format, similar to what the Nations Cup that's coming up in Wellington, which means that there can be Grand Prix and small tour horses. A country, in order to qualify for the Olympics, has to have some Grand Prix horses as members of their team. They can't do it just on a small tour. In Wellington, at the Nations Cup here, there'll be 3 bonus points. Sorry, I said that wrong. There's 1.5 bonus points in Wellington for the Grand Prix, so they automatically, if you got a 70, you have a 71.5. In the Pan Am Games, what they're talking about is 3 bonus points for the Grand Prix. So a 70 suddenly becomes a 73. So it makes a difference for countries choosing what strategy you're going to use, which the U.S. is in a similar situation, trying to figure out. We're lucky in a way that we can use it a little bit more as a developing competition, but on the other hand, it is important that we try to win as well. So we're not going to just send a team that we think could one day be good. So, but it can't. We at least can use it that way. So then the other major championship this year is the World Breeding Championships are back in Ermelo in Holland in early August. So those are sort of the major competitions that are going to be coming up. I think 2023 could be quite an exciting year, and it'll be very fun to watch how these different countries do in the competitions and who ends up qualifying for Paris. So that was about it on competitions that are coming up. I just returned from Rome with the 5-star meeting, which is the 5-star judges meeting. Just a brief note on that, the title or the nomenclature with the judges has changed slightly. You'll see sometimes that they refer to levels. So a level 5-star is now a level 4. And which has really been kind of confusing. But you'll see the dressage community fought to keep the star system. The FEI went to this level system because they wanted all disciplines to have the same way of rating their judges. And most only have 4. We do not, there is no 1 star, there was no 1 star in dressage. So now, then that's why it became a level 1 is a former 2 star. But you'll still see the FEI, the dressage 1 to a degree in that they keep the, it will say level 4/5 star. So that's sort of just a quick comment on that. But while we're in Rome, one of the reasons that I went is because I'm a member of the Judges Advisory Group, and which also ties in with the Judges Supervisory Panel. Where some of you were at the USDF Trainers Conference, I assume. I know some were. Right? And of course, there we had all the instructors were members of the JSP. There are a number of members of the JSP. We're fortunate in that we have 2 US, but the JSP in general is made up of a few trainers and primarily judges that are less, they're not necessarily always retired, but they're less active. So within that, we have Lilo Four and Linda Zhang are members of the JSP. They were, of course, at the Trainers Conference. Other members include Evie Eisenhart, Andrew Gardner from Great Britain, and Mary Siegfried from Australia, who was the member of the JSP in Herning. But so the JSP, really their role is, their main role competition-wise is to watch everything. There are 3. Usually it's 2 judges and 1 trainer. In Herning it was 2 trainers and 1 judge. But normally it's 2 judges and 1 trainer, and they watch the competition, but they also watch a video. So if a judge misses that somebody missed the 2s or messed something up or made a mistake, and they see that the scores are all whatever, they're all 7/8, and then there's all right, I should rephrase that. If they see that it's all 5s and 6s, and then they see there's an 8 there, they'll go back and look at it, and if they see that the person just missed, then they can change the score. So that they have, in that sense, have a very important role. Their other role is helping to determine where the next 5-star judges are going to come from and who they might be. So they sort of monitor the judges, and in that manner they work with the Judges Advisory Group. The Judges Advisory Group is quite small, it's just 5 of us. David Hunt, who is the trainer for the on the JSP, who was also here at the Trainers Conference, is on it. Stephen Clark, who was the former Judge General for the FEI. The Judge General position was removed a couple of years ago, maybe 5 years ago now. But so as a former, most recent Judge General, Stephen Clark is on. Hans Christian Mathiasen is on because he is head of the International Officials Club, IDOC. And then Katrina Roos, yes, I know, thanks. So Katrina's also on it, and she is in charge of the FEI education programs for judges. And then I'm on as whatever, as the joker. But so anyway, the role of the Judges Advisory Group, which is a small, as I said, it's a very small group. We are pretty quiet in what we do. But we recommend appointment of course directors for the courses that are for the educational programs for FEI judges. We are supposed to standardize delivery of judges' education. That's one of the things we're working on. Review educational content of courses. Review and evaluate quality of judges, which is done in collaboration with the JSP. When judges talk about their dashboards, that's what the JSP watches. So if a show goes on in Wellington, and it may not be a member of the JSP here, but they may see that one judge is way off on something, they watch all the scores. And if that happened, and it could be anywhere in the world, it's not because of the way the scores come in, it could be anywhere. So they watch for that and then identify judges in need of remedial education to meet quality of judging standards, also in collaboration with the JSB. So what the goal is really is to help judges that do have a little bit, that need a little bit more assistance and guidance, is to be able to help them as opposed to sort of demoting or do something along those lines. The whole concept of demoting is, because you may hear sometimes people talk about demoting judges, or that judge should be demoted. But the problem is if somebody's, say, a 5-star or a 4-star and they're demoted to a 3-star, then it's unfair to all the athletes because you're riding in front of that judge in the same test and getting the same scores, and nothing has really changed. So the direction is really trying to do, I love it, remedial education, but they basically get mentoring, more mentoring. Remedials doesn't sound so good, but there's some mentoring help in general.
Who does the mentoring?
It's either done through Katrina or through one of the Hans Christian might, and Stephen Clark might. Usually it's through the older, when I say older, more established, experienced judges. I have to say that at the 5-star meeting in Rome, there are a lot of interesting things going on, and one of the things that I get to sit in and do what they call their CES. It's not for them an exam, but it is for the lower level ones where videos are played and you have to judge it, and you basically use Black Horse One as a scoring system. And you might have, they have about 30 video clips, and you have to judge, and they're short. It could be 2 movements, it could be a series of 5 movements with transitions, and you have to give your scores and comments for each one. So I've done it twice now. I was also in Amsterdam in September doing it, and then did it in Rome. So it's really for me, it's very, very interesting because it really shows you how difficult it is for the judges and how much appreciation you really have for what the judges do. Sometimes what they do on these is because they do it a lot of it's done to generate more discussion, so you're not always looking at 8, 9, 10s, but you're looking at when a horse has, say, a nice passage, comes in, makes a nice transition to the piaffe, then stops dead in the piaffe, and then piaffes a few steps, and then sort of passages out, but maybe it takes 20 meters, no, it doesn't take 20, but maybe it takes 10 meters to get a good passage. And what scores do you give for that? So they give you the really, what I would call really tricky ones in a lot of ways. And when you're sitting there, of course, you have more time than you would in real life, right? To give your score, to think about it. Because sometimes the other judges are a little slower, or they're making comments, and you can go back and fix something. But in real life, you can't do that. So I think in the end, it gives you a lot more respect for what the judges do and how quickly they have to make decisions. And then you're thinking, you can have, in one of the examples, the horse does a beautiful flying change. There's a flying change on the final Grand Prix centerline. The horse does a beautiful flying change at X, goes about 3 or 4 strides, and suddenly breaks, and then goes back into the canter and does a beautiful pirouette. And so the question then becomes, which box does it go in? And so then there's a lot of discussion back and forth amongst the judges on why it should be in a certain box. And one box has a coefficient and the other box doesn't. So it can make a huge difference. And in this particular case, I thought the rider did a half halt that was a little too strong and the horse stopped. But it was several strides away from the pirouette. So then some say, well, it wasn't part of the pirouette. So these are just examples of where it can get very tricky. But the overall feeling is that if it's part of a transition where they're trying to do the pirouette, then it has to go to the pirouette box, which had a coefficient again. So I think it leads to a lot of lively discussion on that part of the judging. So I think that is, for me, it's very rewarding, if you will, to see that the judges are very much trying to discuss things and communicate. They communicate with one another and discuss how they would handle these things. But as I said, for me, it also gives you a lot of respect towards the judges. And it sort of ties in, I think, in this day and age, more than ever, the judges have become the ones responsible for dressage and maintaining the standards. And I think it's a little bit scary to me in a way, but they have a huge responsibility. One of the comments that was made once at a high-level meeting I was in by one of the very top athletes said, "Just tell me what you want to see and I'll do it." And I was thinking to myself, when I was young, we used to think about what was classically correct, what was appropriate, now the attitude is very much from the athletes. What do the judges want to see, and I'll do it. So the judges, I think it's very important that the judges do make sure that the halt is immobile, because that reflects the quality of the training. It's very important to show that the horse does have a good walk, because again, that reflects the quality of the training. And if you sort of skip over that, the judges are sort of ignoring, they're not taking their responsibility away and their role. So I think that's something that's very, very important to keep in mind, and why, for me, the education of judges is crucial. And on that, just sort of a side note, I think that within the US, we have these judges programs that go on, and a lot of times we hear that the competitors don't want the judges forum. At White Fences recently, they have 6, 8 judges sitting on the side with their mentor judge. That a lot of competitors don't want that because it makes them nervous. But I think we have to have a much broader view and realize that without that, we won't have good judges' education, and then the sport will really suffer. So I think it's as athletes, I think it's part of our responsibility to make sure that we also assist in helping in the education of judges as we can. One of the other presentations that they did during the 5-star in Rome was by Dr. Rachel Murray. She's a British vet. She's been with the British team. She also has a lot of other degrees. She's got one of those names that afterwards are all these letters that go on and on and on. She does a lot of studies, actually some of it similar to what Hilary Clayton does, on pressure points and the things like this with bridles and saddles and whatnot. But she did a presentation basically on horse welfare and this whole horse welfare social license issue that is now, I'm sure some of you have read about. It's sort of big in the press. And it was it's the second time I have seen it. We had it done for a small group of us within the U.S. Equestrian Federation within USEF, those of us that are sort of involved and interested in this aspect of it. And one of the things that she stressed, there are a couple of things that she stressed, but one was that the need for education at all levels, and that it's really important to keep in mind that the majority of competitors out there are actually at a lower level. And so when on a social license welfare issue, you're looking at the top Olympic horses or the very top horses, you're looking at less than 1% of the horses out there competing. And so that's a very slim part of the welfare issue. So then welfare, the education, once again, education becomes extremely important as part of the welfare issue. The other thing she mentioned, which I think we all kind of probably have come across at some point, is for the judges to always think about the comments that they make. If a judge says in the comments that the score is such and such because the mouth is open, what does the competitor go and do? They usually just tighten the noseband and don't try to fix maybe what's causing the issue. Or don't talk about the tightness of the back or balance of the horse or some other issue. And I think within it, it's very difficult for judges to get right down to the core, but it is sort of important for the competitors to understand what is the core issue and not just what the symptoms are. Because I think sometimes when it's the symptoms, then we're just looking for quick fixes, and that's not always in the horse's best interest. I think the horse welfare issue, in Europe, it's a huge issue. We were in France in Compiègne at the competition. At that point I had 2 young riders with us. And the rumors started going around the showgrounds that there were people hiding behind trees and taking pictures. And sure enough, there were. And one of our young riders was completely freaked out by it. But it's relatively common there. You have to. There are people watching all the time and doing pictures and just waiting for that one moment. That might be a bad moment. So I think it's really you have to keep that in mind when you read about this in the papers. That in Europe it's much more serious. In Aachen, in the rider meeting, they always do a rider meeting, and in that meeting, the stewards go through how to handle all the welfare stuff and what. And they're watching out. So if they see a horse that's maybe overbent for a little bit too long, they will let the athlete know, not because they're trying to get you in trouble, but they're trying to prevent you from getting in trouble. So it's a totally, the stewards are actually the advocates for the riders, even though at times you're like, just leave me alone. Right? But I think that it's important to keep in mind, as I said, as we sort of look at this issue all around. It is a big issue here in this country as well. I don't think we have quite the amount of activity, if you will. Some of you may be aware that LA County had a bill to ban spurs, along with cattle prods and other equipment that's used by rodeos, but spurs were included, which would have made it quite interesting for the 2028 LA Olympics. Fortunately, it did not pass, but that bill was put forward. So and when you read about these things, a lot of the rodeos, of course, are banned, and some of the other activities are banned from different areas and from all around the country when you start reading about it. So it's something that we have to be very aware of and how we address it. I think what then, did some of you read what the FEI Welfare Commission put out? No. So some of the things that they made some recommendations, and I thought what was very interesting about that is there a lot of their recommendations, not on the vet side, because there were more that way, but the French Parliament issued something that was very, very similar, getting ready for Paris. And one of those, of course, is the mention of the double bridle, and that the double bridle is, the recommendation is that it should be optional. But that since the Welfare Commission puts it out there, it sounds like it's a welfare issue. However, they don't have a problem with the jumpers or some of the other bridles being used. And by making it optional, I don't think it's that even they are seeing it as a welfare issue. Whether or not it is optional in the end, I don't believe should have anything to do with welfare. It should be a decision of those in the sport of whether it's necessary that everybody ride in a full bridle. And what direction the sport decides to go should be based on the technical aspects and maybe what works for different horses, but not to just a pure welfare issue. I think we have to be very, very careful in what we sort of put into that category. I do think it's quite interesting that the average age of the horses in all three Olympic disciplines is relatively old when it's compared to other equestrian sports. So there's something that says that by doing it the way the FEI does, especially with having, I was going to say minimum ages, but yeah, minimum ages where they can compete at a level, they think that they actually do a lot to protect the horses. I also think within dressage, with our stewards and in this country with our TDs, that we do a lot of checking of horses. So I don't disagree that it's something that we need to keep looking at internally and making sure that we are doing things properly and correctly and in the best interest of the horses. But I think we have to be careful just to sort of throw our hands up and say, okay, this is a welfare issue, so we're not going to do it if we want to keep our sport. I think what is important is that the FEI Commission is independent of the FEI, so that will be interesting to see what happens in the long run there. Are most of you familiar with the FEI Dressage Committee at all? So this at the FEI Dressage Committee, there will be another opening. We're always, basically in North America, but really in the U.S., we're always trying to make sure we could have a member on the FEI Dressage Committee. It's not always so easy. In this case, Patrick Kittle comes off, and he has what they refer to as the organizer seat. You think, of course, Patrick as an athlete, not much as an organizer, but he is involved in the Saab competition that happens in Sweden, which is a invitational with 10 competitors, 10 competition. Quite a prestigious event. The chair of the committee is Maribel Alonso, of course, from Mexico. So it's nice to at least have a North American on there. In the past, Frank Kemperman, who was the organizer of Aachen for years and years and years, was the chair. And the interesting thing about the chair position is it can go on for a long time. Right? Everybody else on the FEI dressage committee is a 4-year term. And then there's always, it's usually one comes off per year, rotates out. So the other members are, the deputy chair is Monica Theodorescu, Peter Storr, who's on, I believe, in the judge position, Frederico Pintias from Portugal is on definitely in the judge position. Yvonne Silvia Los de Munez, I can never say her name, is on from the Riders Club, but she's also on the FEI Athletes Committee, so she's involved in quite a bit. And the reason I mention what they're on is the different stakeholders groups of the FEI, which are they're independent, but they're officially recognized by the FEI. Usually they put forward somebody for the dressage committee. So the stakeholder clubs are the International Riders Club, which Isabel Wirth is chair of, the International Trainers Club, which David Hunt is chair of, the International Dressage Officials Club, which is the one that Hans Christian is chair of, and then the equestrian organizers, which is all the disciplines within the FEI, but there is a dressage subgroup. Right now there is no one listed as the chair of that, but they will normally put somebody forward. Janine Malone is still listed as our North American representative to that. On the dressage officials, IDOC, which is the dressage officials, Janet Foy was secretary, I think, before. She is now North American representative, and Christy Wysocki is now secretary. So we have a fair amount of involvement from the U.S. in these clubs, which I think is very important, and it is said that it's really important that the North America is represented on these FEI committees. The dressage committee, because I know it's hard to believe, but it has a tendency to be Eurocentric, right? And they don't really understand all the issues on the global. So when I was on it, I was expected to be representing everything outside of Western Europe. And then we did have, when I was on there was a judge from Russia on it as well. So at least that part of the world was covered. But we had to worry about the rest of the world. And so a lot of times there are ideas on how they do things. You know, they're the ones that come up with how the Nations Cups should work. So you can imagine that Nations Cup on a global level versus what you can do in Western Europe is quite different. And similarly with when we talk about the World Cup and the World Cup qualifiers. The FEI likes to have everything the same around the world, which is understandable, but it's not always very doable. They knew in 2022, and they sort of announced it last year at the Sports Forum in Switzerland, is the creation of the International Grooms Association. So this is I think it's quite a good step forward. This is an association associated with the FEI, so the grooms can have a voice. And I think grooms in this country have a pretty decent life compared to JJ's back there, compared to some of the grooms in Europe and how they're treated in Europe. It's a little better than it was, but when I was there competing, the grooms are always, you go to a competition, the competition helps arrange the hotels. They're not like here. And usually the grooms were in a hotel attic type room, no air conditioning. It could be in Wiesbaden, it was almost 100 degrees one time with no air conditioning, maybe a fan, and very poor food. And then a lot of times the grooms stay in the vans on the grounds for them. So I think it's really important actually that this happened. And recognizing there's a big movement now within the FEI to recognize and appreciate the roles of the grooms, because they really are the ones that probably know more about the horse than anybody else in the care of the horses. So I think that this is it's a very big step forward, and important that they're recognized that way. Just going back to the championships, in 2026, those World Championships, the bidding process has just started, so we do not know where they will be. So that will be, I think it will be interesting to see, and it will be similar, it's being done similar to it was in 2022, in that each discipline has its own championships. It just so happened that Herning had 4 different disciplines, but after I was going to say Kentucky, but after North Carolina, after Tryon, thank you. After Tryon, it was determined Tryon lost money. Normandy, 4 years before that, lost money. Lexington really lost money. And it was decided that the World Championships is just too big and too costly. It needs to be divided up. So the 2022 was the first year it was divided up. So, of course, the eventing championships were in Italy. I think the driving championships were, I don't know where the driving were, to tell you the truth. Endurance was also in Italy, but and held separately. But Herning, of course, had vaulting, para-dressage, dressage, and jumping. So it would be interesting to see what happens in 2026. And I think Herning actually did quite well. There were quite a nice championships, very well organized. The arenas were very good. I thought it was very well done. So that process is just starting. It'll be interesting to see. And then finally, I wanted to bring attention to 2 things. One, I'm actually going to do it the other order I have on my paper. For 2023, the rules about how events are named was changed. And you may have noticed that in Wellington. When I say the names, the categories, whether CDI 3-star, 4-star, 5-star, CDI 2-star, CDI 1-star. If you remember in the past, sometimes you would have a show where there was a CDI 3-star pre-St. George and a CDI 1-star pre-St. George. So for a number of years, and I've been off the committee for 4 years, so at least for 8 years, they've been talking about doing this, in that a 1-star would be small tour, so pre-St. George I1. 2-star would be medium tour, which is the intermediate A and intermediate B. And then a 3-star is the Grand Prix, and then from 3-star it moves up to 4-star and 5-star. And that what separates those is simply the prize money and the qualifications you need to be able to compete in them. You can't just go into a 5-star, you have to meet certain requirements. And then the prize money is greater, and sometimes the type of judge they use is different. So in this, one of the things that the U.S. fought for, and we were fortunately able to do, is when they say a 2-star can only be medium tour, so intermediate A and intermediate B, a lot of CDIs in this country start out as 2-stars because the cost, it's a lot easier to do. And we can feel that we can grow a few more CDIs by allowing them to do 2-stars. So we fought for them to allow a Grand Prix to be concluded, just the Grand Prix, to be part of it, and that Grand Prix would have no points going towards world ranking list or anything that way, but at least it would be part of the competition. So at least we could have the Grand Prix. So you can't do a special and you can't do a freestyle in a 2-star, Grand Prix special or Grand Prix freestyle, but at least you could do a Grand Prix. So it allows us in Texas, we have one, actually I think the one in Oregon that's a new one is going to be a 3-star, and obviously the one in Virginia is now going to be a 3-star. But a lot of organizers, when they first start, think it would be a lot easier to do a 2-star. It's less intimidating, and we can start to grow because we need more CDIs around the country, I think, in a lot of ways, to help develop our riders. And as we try to put together the qualifications to go to Chicago for the Festival of Champions, at certain levels, we find that we want to have at least some CDI scores, especially when you're talking about a national champion at Grand Prix. You want them to come through a little stricter, if you will, qualification process. So within that, what it also has allowed the FEI to do is add more ranking lists, world ranking lists. So they have, for basically in 2022, 2023, the old world ranking list used to be a horse rider combination. Now there are 2 ranking lists at a 3-star, CDI 3-star and above. So you have the horse one and you have the rider one. So you can look and see who is the leading rider, or you can look and see who's the leading horse. And they don't always, of course, match up. They can be a little bit separate. They're based also on 8 months nowadays instead of 12 months. It used to be 12-month ranking list. Then you probably saw some of the, in the news a little bit, a couple of years ago, they added the ability for someone to stay on the ranking list, which Jessica did when she was pregnant. So during a pregnancy, you can hold your slot on the ranking list for a certain period of time, so that female athletes are not penalized, if you will, that way. So I think it's also another improvement. And then they have the world ranking. Same now. They have world ranking list for CDI 2-star, so for the medium level, and they have a ranking list for the CDI 1-star. They also have world ranking lists for the youth divisions, which would be young rider, junior, pony, and children's. At this point, since I'm a youth coach, I look at these things. We currently have 4 U.S. riders in the top 44. Christian Simonson, I think, is the top one at number 10 in the world. So that is all I had on my stuff. I'm happy to try to answer questions.
Can you explain the point system a little bit? So if you go to a pre-CDI and there's only 5 versus 15 someplace else, is there a difference?
No, not anymore. When we went from a percentage, so the rest of the world has been on a point system for years. So we have always been under pressure to switch to a point system, but we have always said in studying the numbers that we actually send the best combinations, or we historically sent the best combinations, when you base it on percentages. But percentages made it a little difficult to understand when someone comes from another league. So I'm glad you brought the question up, because I was going to mention that. So we'll say when Frederick competes, right? This is his first, I believe, I know it is in this cycle, this qualifying period. This is his first CDIW outside of the Western European League. So since he won, he takes 20 points towards the Western European League, that he goes on towards his ranking. If he wins again at the Palm Beach Derby, he will only get 10. After that, you only get half the points. So they can't, because years and years ago, there was someone who came over from Europe and got all the points here and went back, and they were given full points for the wins here. And they went back and they were high up on the European ranking, Western European ranking. And I know it's, again, another shock, but the Europeans weren't so happy about that. And so it got changed, so now it's 100% first win, 50%. And so the same, if a U.S. rider goes into the Western European League and they win, they would get 20 points towards ours, towards the North American League, if that is their declared league, right? Because you can also be living over there and have a slightly different. So then, so that's one thing you have to always watch. And that was one reason they wanted all systems the same. So when we first went to a point system, we said, but it's really not fair. If you have 3 competitors in your class, you get 20 points, and somebody who has 15 competitors, or like the other night, or whatever it was, that they get 20 points for the same win. So we then, for a year or so, we then said, okay, if there are, I think it was 8 or more, then you got the full points. We worded it differently. If it was 8 or more, you got, I don't remember the number, but you got 15 points. Sorry, if they're less than 8, you got 15 points. If there were more than 8, you got your 8 or more, you got your 5 bonus points. So we worded it that way instead of making it sound negative. But then no one was really happy with this. Yeah. And the thing is, again, it doesn't reflect necessarily the score and the placing. So I don't remember which year, but it was one of the recent years it switched to now it's full points regardless. So now there are a lot of reasons for it. I don't know if it's really the best, and we'll always send our best representatives. But I think the first year was the year of COVID, 2020, and no one really knew. I don't think the athletes really realized that the system changed. It takes a lot of strategy, actually, in picking what shows. So one of the reasons it was put in place was to help the organizers, so that somebody would be more inclined to go to WEC, or maybe more inclined to go to Terra Nova or some other show instead of just staying right here and doing only these shows. So that the feeling was then the athletes might travel a little bit more. That was one thought behind it. The other is, as I said, is the harmonization that the FAI is always pushing for. But with the strategy, it's really crucial, right? Which shows you pick and where you go, and then the thing is, only in the U.S. only 3 scores. You can only get from 3 competitions. So if you, I don't know, I'd have to look at the numbers. But if Sarah were to do Palm Beach Derby and she could win, she might be able to drop a show where she only had 17 points. You would take they always take the highest, of course. So when you look at this, you have to always be paying attention. Again, there's a lot of strategy and see where somebody is. And so if she's thinking, well, I want to get ahead of Alice, or I want to get ahead of whatever, Adrian, or Stefan, these are the shows I need to go to try and do that. So there is that strategy. And what's interesting to me is that the example that I cited about the European coming here and then going back. Last year, you may remember Helen Langenhagen, whatever, went to Eastern Europe, to the Central European League, and did a competition where there were 2 horses, and she got her 20 points. And she did it, I think, right before Sertogenbusch, which is the last qualifier for the Western European League. And so it threw Frederick off the list and put her in. This year, when you go through, because I went through all the riders from Europe, most of the top ones have done a Central European show once because they can get their 20 points once. So they learned that they can go to Poland, or they can go to Hungary, or they can go anywhere in Central Europe and get 20 points, and then that puts them already. Because it's hard, especially for the Europeans, it's very hard to win. So then it's 20 points for first, second is 17, and then it goes down by 2 to 15, and then 13, 12, 10. And then from 10, it goes down by 1 point. Then it's 10, 9, 8, yeah.
Do the athletes have somebody to call to help them with that, or do they have to figure it all out? That in my complicated title that I hold, that's one of the things we try to, it's one of the things we try to talk to them about, is about their strategies and how they're going to do it, Yeah, and of course you know what the other person's doing, but you can't say. No, not really, but yeah.
Do the U.S. know if they're going to send a small tour mixed team or full team?
We haven't really decided. So the official sort of answer that when asked, I always say is it really descends once we know the applicants and who's really applying for the Pan Am and how they're doing. I don't know the exact date, but sometime in July is the cutoff when the qualifying period ends. And so we'll look at it then and try to determine. But we are, as I said, and we're interested in developing combinations if possible. But that could be Grand Prix, it could be small tour, right? Yeah.
It starts with declaring, so you know who's interested in it.
Yeah. We want to, from that, we wanted, yes, to try to do development, but we also want to have the best team we can. Even though we don't have to win, we still want to win. Yeah. So it's the nature of the game, right? Yeah.
Who is we that decides who goes and?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because the way it works within USEF, we have different parts of volunteer committees that help. Within the staff, they don't necessarily make the decisions; they help guide, I would say. But staff, Hallie Griffin, who is the lead person for dressage in USEF, really oversees a lot of it. But so the qualifying procedures are written by usually with the help with staff doing it, but also with we have they're called selectors. We also have a selections group, which is slightly different. But the selectors I think it's 5 or 6, and they all have been athletes. They can't be active right now at the moment, of course, but they're almost all athletes. It's very hard you can't really put a judge on that kind of group because of the conflicts. So in that group of selectors, Kathy Conley is the chair of it, and then it changes sometimes who's in there. But say for the Nations Cup coming up in Wellington, Pierre St. Jacques is chair of this selections working group, which is slightly different. They're the ones that choose which competitors go in those things. But when it comes to a World Championship or Olympics, Pan Am, it will go to the selectors. But whenever we do Nations Cups, then it goes to the selections working group. It's a slightly different group, but again, it's the athletes. The selections working group is made up of a little bit more diverse group.
Is it always the same, or does it change?
There's some that change. I mean, but the whole group does not change. It's one of those things where you kind of get to know it and know the process pretty well. I mean, I was a selector. Now I can't be a selector. Now I'm an advisor, but I was a selector for a number of years, and Kathy and I would sort of go back and forth who chaired. But then by that point, you sort of know the system and know how it works. But it's always good to have some outside blood looking at it and bringing their ideas. But it isn't. When you ask your question, in the end, it will be based really on scores. It will be quite objective. It's not looking at. It's really looking at it and say, okay, what are our best chances here? Yeah, if with those best chances, if we have an option, maybe, but it's really about the best chances. Who's going to be the strongest? And then all of it is overseen by the legal department of USCF. There's every single aspect of it. Yeah. So that's always watched. I mean, they're always, and that's why I think it's good to have people in there that have some in there that have the history, because you know what you can do and can't do. You can't switch something and it can be something simple, because you could say, well, let's just switch this a little bit, but legal will come back and say, yeah, but if this other person knew that's the way it was going to be, maybe they would have applied to be on the team. Mm-hmm. So there are all these little holes you have to be looking for all the time on how people could challenge something. And so there is a certain amount of subjectivity written into it. When it comes to the selection procedures, if you read them, you'll see there are about 10 criteria that we have to follow. And so some of it has some subjectivity. You're always paying attention to the trend of scores and how what the trend is. Is it an upward trend? Is it a downward trend? And so that's one that's there. They're all stated, so everybody knows what it is. But if you're going to go into a world championship and you know so-and-so's the judge and you watch the scores, and we've never had it, but it's a possibility. If it's obvious that competitor never does well under that judge, you might discuss whether or not that one. Yeah. So and that's put in there too. So there are a lot of so the things that are somewhat subjective are all clearly stated, and we have to stay within the boundaries of those. Yeah. Because you don't want to do necessarily just a ranking list. In the end, because it may not be. And that was what's sort of interesting, I think, in the new Olympic format, is that reserve force that goes you know, if you go and whatever, the arena's got flags all around or has this big screen and that's up or the sun hits it a certain way and the horse isn't good in that, you can actually switch. You could switch. You have to have a vet or medical reason, but initially it was proposed that they wanted the strategy, but that a chef or someone could choose what horse they want to put in. So in other words, the horses that qualify in the Grand Prix do not have to be the ones that move to the special, theoretically. Right? If there are 3, 2 of them have to be, but yeah, but you could put a reserve, you could switch a horse before the special. But now it has to be vet or medical. Yeah, initially it was proposed that it just be a strategy that the chef could decide. But interestingly enough, the International IOC, the International Olympic Committee, also approves all selections for all sports. And they don't approve the selection process, but they approve the process of how it will work at the competition, and they would not approve that. So what I said initially for the U.S. Olympic Committee does approve all of our selection criteria. And they do it for all sports within the U.S. movement, Olympic movement. Yeah. Yeah.
It's quite an Excel spreadsheet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I have one more.
Yeah.
As a European, I find it strange that for the last 3 big championships, our national championship is after our big championship.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it just does not make sense
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah, that's because you come from a little, long, narrow country, I think. Right. The issue, there are several issues, and the other thing is that it's easy for you to get to Germany or where some of the other main competitions are. As you know, or as you would remember, we used to do Gladstone.
Yeah.
And then Gladstone would be, it's a beautiful, Gladstone's a wonderful facility. But you would go and then, in those days, the team would be named or selected, and it might be a longer list. So you might have 6 or 8 that move forward from Gladstone and then go to Europe, and then you might have some switching between 3, 4, and 5, say, something like that in there. But in general, the team is pretty well known. The issue that we have is our riders have to compete in Europe, right? So if we try to do Gladstone, we don't have enough time. And so Paris is when? August, late August? August, I think, yeah. So you know, in order to do, so whether you do Gladstone, whatever, you would have to almost do it in July, or do you go to Germany, or do you go, doesn't mean Germany, but do you go to Europe first and then come back, or how? But you need to be in that arena. First, it's a subjective sport, 1, I think that's important. But 2, when you compete in a field with the best in the world, your standard usually goes up. And so what we have found over time is that our riders do much better when they have time in Europe. And we have some, of course, that say I don't need to be there, but you do need to be there. You need to be, I was going to say seen, but you need to be familiar with it. You need to feel comfortable in it. Yeah. Yeah, so that it's basically practical. We probably would if we could, but we found it hasn't worked very well. So now I think what happens in the national championships, the festival in Chicago, is that, of course, the top horses have been in Europe, or they're going off to World Championship, wherever they're going to, and so they may not be there. But it still is, I think, an extremely important competition, whether it's for the athletes or for the owners, because the owners are crucial to this too. And so then it keeps everybody a little bit more motivated, and it's not such a bad thing that somebody has a chance to win a major competition, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise, yeah. Yeah.
From where I come, it seems.
Yeah. No, it's very, very different, but I think that's what we have found over time that works best for us. Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you for taking a second term as president of USTF. It was very generous of you.
Thanks. No, I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, she was right. Yeah.
Changing
Yeah.
tack a bit. The FAI is
Yeah.
And I am, as a competitor, I'm always amazed at judges who get paid less than I would charge for technical resource per hour.
Yeah, yeah, this-
I normally, technical resource, 250 an hour. Here in Wellington, it goes up to 450 in Wellington. But how, it just doesn't make sense that somebody gives up their weekends and days for what is it,
100, I believe it's still 125 euros.
This is.
Yeah, they're trying to move. There is a move to. They would love to see it go to like 175, but they don't feel that's possible. So they're thinking of going to 150. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. No, yeah, exactly.
It should be that an hour.
Yeah.
Who works for 125?
Yeah, and it's you bring up an interesting point because it's the way the judges are paid here is really exclusive, if you will, to the U.S. and how. I don't know about Canada, the other North American countries, but it's definitely not the way it's done in Europe, which allows, obviously it can allow for more panel judging. I think in the German system they don't really have any single judge on a class ever. Here it would be very, very expensive for every show to have 2 judges on every class. So in some of the other countries are similar, and we just, at the judges forum, they went through different countries presented their judge education programs and development programs. I think Great Britain they do single judges similar to what we do in the lower levels. Then when it's regional or national, then they have panels. But the other European countries almost always have more than one judge. But it's possible because this doesn't have the cost that we have. And so the judges, thanks. The judges would like a little bit of an increase. But they also, they're paid by the organizer, not by the FEI, which is, just to be clear. So that is the organizer's responsibility. But they would like, and I think everybody agrees they should be paid more. But they also feel that the stewards need to be paid more. The judges feel the stewards need to be paid more as well, because they also work for almost nothing. Yeah.
So the FAI goes back to what historically wealthy organization.
Yeah.
And the competitors spend a lot of money to have all their ducks in a row to get to those competitions.
Yeah.
They would like to have more judges who, not demoted, but maybe lose their position, and they feel that there's a loss of income. And of course, I don't want to mention the C word, but it leaves everyone open to corruption.
Right.
And because somebody who, I only work for this, but I can use it.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think it's an interesting issue in the FEI. As I said, the FEI doesn't, it's all done through the organizers. So what would happen is the way it is in the rule book, I believe it's actually in the rule book what they're paid. It is in the rule book, which means it has to go before the General Assembly, which means all the countries, at the General Assembly are the different countries vote on it, and every country has one vote. So it could be that countries that maybe don't have the funding of some of the Western European countries would vote against it and vote it down. So it's something they have to approach carefully. I don't think that, I think with the number of officials, I don't know how many officials are within the FEI, but the number of officials that are within the FEI with all 7 disciplines is pretty high. Yeah. It would be, I think it would be pretty astronomical. Yeah. I don't know what their income is. They're not like USDF. You can't go and see our budget. Their budget, like you can ours.
I can work it out. How much? Yeah, I run an international company.
Yeah.
So I know with what
Well, they did.
providers paying.
Yeah.
And for those stamps in our books, and
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
they run out and all of this, I can.
Well, I can't speak for the FEI on that stuff. I just know they have a beautiful building, but that was not paid for by the members, that was paid for by someone else.
The C group.
What?
The C group.
Ah.
Staying on the subject of corruption. They talk about NGOs, transport, the different groups and regions, especially C group being the largest group. Does that mentioned for the.
I'm sorry, I can't hear everything because of the fan. Yeah.
The C group.
Who's the C group?
The largest group for the Olympics.
I don't know.
You know, you have your North American group and each band
Yeah.
for the Olympics put into a band. C group is the largest. Did they talk about, because I know there was some, they were talking about maybe splitting that up a bit or something.
I don't know. That I don't know anything about. Yeah.
I just wondered.
Yeah, no, I don't, yeah, that part I don't know about, yeah. Yeah. There's a lot we don't know about the FEI. Yeah.
I had a question in regards to USEF
Yeah.
and a proposed rule that I believe is circulating. It's not passed one way or the other. I think they're accepting public comment on it. It's in regards to USEF certified judges
Yeah.
and training and the ability to train. I believe the current rule, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't show in front of a judge that you have worked with for
30 days, but for the most part, 30 days, yeah.
So, but I also know most people who are judges could not live off of just judging, even in
Right.
the United States, let alone Europe under those prices, but just in the United States, I would say what, $5.50 a day is the average.
It's sort of the
judging
average now,
fee.
yeah. Mhm.
You know, do you have any status update on that rule? Is it gonna go anywhere?
I think there's been obviously a lot of discussion on that rule. If you read through it carefully, there are a lot of things that are not possible.
And is it
that-
also multidiscipline, like?
It's multidiscipline, yeah.
And is that?
Yeah. And that's it's sort of the same as with the FEI, but all the organizations are trying to get, USEF has what, 26 breeds and disciplines, something like that? So they have 26 different types of licensed officials and judges and that they have to keep track of. So they would love to have everything harmonized too. So that's a little bit what they're trying to do. But they also are trying to address where they've had some conflicts of interest that are definitely not being followed. I'm not a fan at all of the rule that you're talking about, the proposed rule. It was my understanding that it was actually going to be withdrawn. I don't know, it has not been, it's still on there. There are several things on there, and one of them is that you can only, it can be the student, that's the problem with this rule, is you can also, it could be the judge themselves, or it could be the judge could be a student of somebody. So if I have a judge who's a student in Wellington, and I do a clinic in Washington, state of Washington, and somebody rides in my clinic, and then that judge flies and does a show in Washington, according to that rule, that would be against the rules. And she would have no idea that this was also a student of mine. Yeah. So and then what I love about the rule, it talks about you can only do it once the relationship is permanently terminated. And from my experience, the only way to permanently terminate a relationship is through death. So I don't know how else you can do it. Yeah, because especially in the horse business, because I mean, how many times does somebody leave you as a trainer and then they're back again or whatever?
Right.
So how do you know it's permanently terminated? And then the horse sale one is even trickier, because you don't really know if you buy the horse that maybe this person sold it, the judge sold it. And if you read at the very bottom, it's always, the responsibility is always put on the competitor. And I don't know how a competitor knows. How does the young rider in Washington know that the judge coming in is also a student of mine?
Right.
There's no way they're going to know. Yeah. So I think the whole rule. So the staff person who put it forward from the USEF has been told all these things. So we're trying to.
Good.
Yeah, I think she understood some of the issues, but what concerned me is that it still is posted. Yeah, no, that rule is a big concern. Yeah. Yeah, so it is important to go in and comment. The more comments they have, the harder they have to take it somewhat seriously.